Heading into week 6 of the fantasy football season, here's a few tight ends I looked at on the wire this week. The first guy's David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns. So I said Njoku was in it a few weeks ago, but he really didn't do much in weeks 3 to 4 and 4. But in week 5, he had a huge ball game, David Njoku. 7 catches, 149 yards, and a touchdown. Obviously, a 71-yard touchdown he broke away for in this crazy shootout between the Browns and the Chargers, where the Chargers came back and won it 47-42. So Njoku, he looked like a huge playmaker here for Baker Mayfield and this Brown offense. And obviously, these guys are building a rapport. I know he had a good week 1 at Kansas City, and then the last 3 weeks he peered it off. But right here, Njoku can make plays. He's got breakaway speed like we saw in this ball game on that touchdown. And he's a player that you could give an ad, especially if you had a Max Williams on your roster and he's hurt. If you have a Robert Tonyan, and now it's definitely time to drop him as well, even though I mentioned that last week. So Njoku, he can make plays. Mayfield likes him, and he's available right now in 97% of fantasy leagues. The next tight end I looked at on the wire this week is Dan Arnold of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the Jaguars, they like Arnold a lot in that Henderson deal, and he's got a bigger role than I thought he would have, Arnold, since coming over in a trade last week from the Panthers here to the Jaguars. So Arnold, 6 catches, 64 yards, and a fumble loss on 8 targets in week 5 for him versus the Tennessee Titans. So far, they're integrating him into the offense pretty decently, and he's been a good security blanket for Trevor Lawrence. And Lawrence, he's played better the last 2 weeks since Arnold's come to town. So week 6 here, he's got a good matchup versus the Miami Dolphins, is Dan Arnold. And I think he could possibly find the end zone in that one, or at least catch 5 or 6 passes for 60, 70 yards. And he's another tight end available in 96% of fantasy leagues. So right now, if you need tight end help, I don't think he's a bad ad this week. The next tight end's Ricky Seals-Jones of the Washington football team. So we know Logan Thomas, he's going to be out a few weeks with the hamstring injury. And Ricky Seals-Jones in this one in week 5 versus the Saints. 5 catches, 41 yards in the ball game. So right here, we know this Washington football team, they're going to be trailing a lot this season in ball games, or be in shootouts like we've seen so far as well this year. So right here, the team's 2-3 this year. And in week 6, they got a tough matchup versus the Kansas City Chiefs, where we know Taylor Heineke's probably going to throw the football 45, 50 times in that one just to keep up or play catch up versus Patrick Mahomes in that high-powered Chief offense. And Ricky Seals-Jones is a former Kansas City Chief over the last couple seasons. So after coming off a pretty decent PPR fantasy day in week 5 with Seals-Jones, I think week 6 versus Kansas City, we could see a lot of garbage time plays to him. And also Kansas City's pretty vulnerable versus tight ends, giving up the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends on the season. So I think Ricky Seals-Jones is a decent ad, and he's available in 98% of fantasy leagues. The next tight end is Hunter Henry of the New England Patriots. So Hunter Henry, the last couple weeks here, he's getting into form for this Patriot offense right now. Week 4 versus Tampa Bay, 4 catches, 32 yards, and a touchdown on 5 targets. In week 5 at Houston, 6 catches, 75 yards, and a touchdown on 8 targets. So right here, Hunter Henry, he's been the security blanket and red zone target the last couple weeks here for Mac Jones. And in week 6, he's got a good matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys that give up the 8th most fantasy points to tight end. So it wouldn't be surprised to me if Henry finds the end zone for the 3rd consecutive game versus Dallas. And right now, with a few tight end injuries around the league, I think Hunter Henry could be a good ad this week. And he's still available in 54% of fantasy leagues. So there's worse options on rosters than a Hunter Henry in the 5th and final tight end. I looked at on the wire this week's Tommy Tremble of the Carolina Panthers. So we mentioned the Panthers traded Dan Arnold a couple weeks ago in that deal with Jacksonville because they got Tommy Tremble, and they're pretty high on Tremble. And in this ball game, 2 catches, 12 yards, and a touchdown. So he's a red zone target for Sam Darnold. And the last 2 out of 3 weeks, he's had double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues. Week 3, Houston, 1 carry, 7 yards, and a rushing touchdown with a catch for 30 yards. And then week 4, Dallas, only 1 target. In week 5 versus Philly, like I mentioned, 2 catches, 12 yards, and a touchdown on 4 targets. So right here, Tremble, he's a big target. He's a rookie. He can make some plays. And if you're desperate for a tight end, or in deeper leagues, I don't think he's a bad add, and he's available in 99% of fantasy leagues. So that's a few tight ends I look to add on the waiver wire heading into week 6 of the fantasy football season.